Isabella Carrington glided into the grand ballroom with the confidence of a queen, every eye turning toward her as she prepared to make an announcement that would alter the course of her life forever. Chandeliers glittered overhead, casting reflections on the polished marble floor, while the air was thick with the scent of freshly cut orchids flown in from a private garden in Tuscany. The strings of a live quartet played softly in the background, but the subtle tremble in Isabella's breath made the entire room feel like it was holding its own. The entire Carrington family, along with powerful acquaintances who frequently graced the pages of business and society publications, paused mid-conversation. Behind their smiles and tailored tuxedos, none of them suspected the storm about to break loose from the perfectly composed woman before them. No one knew that Isabella's world had been quietly unraveling for months. Tonight, amid the clinking of crystal glasses and whispers of anticipation, she would drop a bombshell. The end of her marriage to billionaire entrepreneur Julian Carrington. Isabella Carrington was often described as otherworldly. She carried a kind of elegance that seemed both unattainable and grounded in sincerity. Part of her allure came from her upbringing. Born Isabella Hale, the only daughter of two prominent philanthropists in Northern California's wine country, her parents, David and Serafina Hale, had amassed a respectable fortune by investing early in green construction ventures before the market turned mainstream. As a result, Isabella grew up surrounded by ivy-covered estates, private art tutors, exclusive prep schools, and summers on the Amalfi Coast. She developed a refined love for the arts, championed causes related to environmental preservation, and had a sharp ability to read people's motives. She learned early that polished exteriors often masked fractured intentions, a lesson she would soon have to revisit. When Isabella was 23, she met Julian Carrington at a benefit gala hosted by her parents in San Francisco. Julian was already carving a name for himself in the tech space. A sharp, fiercely driven young innovator, he had created a revolutionary data analytics platform. Tall, flawlessly styled, and radiating charisma, Julian made everyone he encountered feel like they were the most important person in the room. His eyes gleamed whenever he spoke about the future, and the intensity of his vision stirred something deep inside Isabella. There was a magnetic pull between them, something that felt less like fate and more like inevitability. That night, they danced beneath crystal chandeliers, laughed over tiny foie gras hors d'oeuvres, and found themselves deep in conversation until well past midnight. The world around them blurred, as if destiny itself had paused to take notes. Their relationship blossomed quickly. Isabella's parents saw Julian's brilliance and admired his grit. Some whispered that Julian came from humble beginnings, raised by a single mother in a cramped apartment in south-central LA, constantly making ends meet. But that only stoked the fire of his ambition. He didn't just want to succeed. He wanted to change the world. He wanted to revolutionize entire industries. Not long after their first meeting, Julian's startup Nexora secured a string of massive deals. Venture capital poured in, elevating him from a tech prodigy to a visionary wunderkind in the eyes of elite investors. Names like Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos were whispered around him, praising his disruptive brilliance. It wasn't just funding, it was a coronation. Julian became a symbol of the future, with entire boardrooms hanging on his every word. Within 2 years, Isabella and Julian were married in a breathtaking ceremony at the Hale family estate. Orchids, imported from a renowned grower in Kyoto, adorned the garden. The bride wore a couture gown by a celebrated Italian designer, and the who's who of elite society attended, including Michelle Obama and humanitarian powerhouse Laurene Powell Jobs. The wedding graced the covers of top-tier magazines, each declaring the couple as the new golden pair of technology and philanthropy. But behind the headlines and curated perfection, tiny cracks were beginning to form, invisible to the world, but not to Isabella. But behind the glamour and grandeur, the marriage carried shadows. Julian's magnetism was undeniable, but so was his ravenous hunger for achievement and fame. A drive so intense it pushed him into 15-hour workdays, relentless global travel, and a growing taste for high-stakes risks in every area of life. Deals that once thrilled him now had to be bigger, faster, louder. He wasn't just chasing success, he was addicted to the chase itself. He confided in Isabella early on. He didn't just want to be successful. He wanted to become the defining name in tech, eclipsing everyone before him. At first, Isabella was inspired by this limitless ambition. She believed it would serve as a vehicle for the causes they both cherished, funding global education programs and advancing environmental reform. But slowly, she began to feel like a passenger on a rocket ship she no longer had any control over. As Julian's star rose, so did the fortress they built around themselves. Their combined wealth soared into the billions. Along with it came layers of advisors, staff, security, and insiders. It became harder and harder to tell which new faces were authentic allies and which were just orbiting Julian's influence. Even at their own dinner table, Isabella sometimes felt like a guest in her own life, watching strangers praise a man she loved but barely recognized. Still, in the early years of marriage, Isabella and Julian remained close. At least during those rare moments he wasn't away for work. Their home, nestled deep in a secluded stretch of Napa Valley, was a masterpiece, a gleaming glass estate with curved stone columns designed by an award-winning architect. It was a striking blend of modernism and timeless elegance. It often appeared on the covers of design and lifestyle magazines. From the outside, people saw a fortress of power and beauty, but Isabella knew it as the place where she wandered alone, more often than not. With Julian gone, she devoted her days to philanthropy, launching art initiatives in local schools, hosting galas for climate action, and championing mental health awareness. While Julian shaped the future through code and capital, Isabella tried to soften the present through compassion. Her intelligence, warmth, and collaborative spirit made her a beloved force in the nonprofit world. Yet something was missing. Julian's ambition had shifted, once unstoppable, now corrosive. He spent more nights buried in Silicon Beach, meetings in Southern California, than jetted off to Asia or Europe to close high-stakes deals. The romantic dinners he and Isabella once shared had devolved into hurried email updates or curt phone calls squeezed between flights. There were nights when she stared at a half-set table, candles flickering for no one, the sound of her own breathing louder than any conversation. Even when Julian was home in Napa, his thoughts were rarely with her. His mind was tethered to the next product launch, the next board meeting, the next wave of disruption. Isabella lived in a constant state of emotional drought. Their once electric chemistry had dulled into static, a hum of absence that followed her room to room. She tried to express this, tried to reach him, but Julian, ever the fixer, treated her concerns like a checklist item rather than a plea for connection. "Let's set a calendar reminder to talk about this," he'd once said, with all the warmth of a quarterly report. Over time, small cracks began to form in Isabella's trust. She noticed odd moments, when Julian lowered his voice suddenly during a call, or when a casual dinner meeting with colleagues suspiciously expanded to include an unusual number of female associates. He brushed off her questions with charm, but the charm had grown paper-thin. Still, for years, the thought that anything more sinister was happening remained just a quiet anxiety at the edge of her awareness. She clung to logic, to motherhood, to the belief that Julian would never cross that line, until the doubt began whispering louder than reassurance. Julian wasn't just her husband. He was the father of their 2 children, Eli and Lena, and he was a media darling. A charismatic innovator who gave stirring keynotes at global tech summits, claiming that artificial intelligence could revolutionize humanitarian aid. The press adored him. The public saw a genius. She saw a ghost. But every perfect narrative eventually begins to unravel. Summer arrived in the Napa Valley, warm breezes stirring the air and the scent of blooming wisteria wafting through the estate gardens. Isabella was preparing for their annual family vacation to Crystal Lake, a tradition she and Julian had started years earlier as a way to unplug and reconnect. For a moment, she allowed herself to hope. Maybe this trip would help bridge the distance between them. Maybe the version of Julian she fell in love with would greet her lakeside. But Julian's schedule changed at the last minute. He said an emergency meeting with a new venture partner from Munich had popped up, so he would fly in separately and meet them at the lake. In the past, Isabella might have accepted that change with calm understanding. But not now. A voice in her head, sharper and more insistent, questioned every excuse. It was no longer a whisper, it was a warning siren. That voice grew louder the moment she stumbled upon Julian's phone buzzing unattended in his home office. The device, normally protected by facial recognition, had been left unlocked, a rare oversight. A message blinked across the screen from a contact she didn't recognize. "Miss you. Can't wait to see you again. Eh." Her heartbeat surged. She stared at the screen, pulse pounding in her ears. She didn't know who A was, but the intimacy of the message sent chills down her spine. It wasn't business. It wasn't ambiguous. It was betrayal, typed in 10 casual words. A weight of dread twisted her stomach. She set the phone down as though it had burned her fingers and stepped away, trembling. She set the phone down as if it were on fire and backed away, adrenaline spiking in her bloodstream. Over the following days, Isabella began noticing more signs. Julian would vanish for hours when they were meant to be working from home together. He'd receive texts mid-conversation and abruptly shift topics, becoming increasingly detached. Sometimes she'd find him staring blankly at his laptop, not typing, just lost in thought, then snapping back with a fake smile when he realized she was watching. Isabella felt torn. Should she confront him directly or keep preserving the fragile illusion of normalcy? Every word felt like it carried the weight of unspoken truths. More and more, she felt like a stranger in her own marriage. Like she was haunting the halls of a relationship that hadn't officially died, but was quietly decaying. One evening, while hosting a fundraiser for mental health outreach, Isabella locked eyes with her longtime friend, Naomi Lynn, who knew all too well how distant Julian had become. From across the candlelit table, Naomi offered her a sympathetic glance, while Julian, ever the showman, entertained the guests with tales of his latest tech breakthroughs. To the untrained ear, everything he said sounded dazzling, innovative, even noble. His voice was smooth, his delivery flawless, a masterclass in public persona. But to Isabella it rang hollow. The man she had fallen in love with used to seek real connection. The man now seated across the table felt like a charismatic hologram, expertly performing. The warmth was gone, the spark replaced by script. After dinner, Naomi caught up with Isabella in the grand foyer, beneath an opulent chandelier. "You look absolutely drained," Naomi said softly, placing a hand on her arm. "Maybe it's time you step back from all this. Even just for a bit. You deserve to breathe." She hesitated, lowering her voice. "You don't have to keep carrying this alone." Isabella offered a gracious smile. "Thank you for saying that. I think I need some fresh air." Before Naomi could press further, Isabella slipped out into the garden. The night air was crisp, scented with blooming night jasmine. It helped calm her pulse, but her mind raced with contradictions. Was she reading too much into things? Could the message from A have come from an investor or colleague using overly casual language? Was this paranoia or instinct trying to protect her? Isabella clung to every possible explanation, anything to quiet the voice in her head. But she wasn't naive. She knew the difference between corporate flattery and intimate secrecy. There was a weight to the message, a knowing intimacy that no business partner would risk. Still, she moved forward, half in denial, until everything changed. 2 weeks later, an anonymous email arrived. "Julian has been seeing someone else for months. Check his travel itinerary from his Munich trip." A friend attached was a single photo, Julian stepping out of a sleek black car in Santa Monica, his arm wrapped tightly around a slender blonde woman in her late 20s. She was laughing at something he had just whispered, her body angled into his. The expression on Julian's face was not platonic. The look on Julian's face was unmistakable, not platonic. Isabella felt a crushing weight in her chest as she stared at the photo over and over. She tried to convince herself it could be misinterpreted, a bad angle, a misleading moment, but her gut said otherwise. Her first instinct was to call him immediately, to confront him with the evidence. But Julian was away, coincidentally, or maybe not, on yet another international trip. She dialed his number. Voicemail. She considered reaching out to his executive assistant, Chloe, but stopped herself. She didn't want a polished excuse, carefully crafted to pacify her. She didn't want another version of the truth wrapped in PR gloss. She needed the truth from Julian himself. Her stomach churned with anguish, but a calmer part of her brain urged restraint. A single photograph and an anonymous email weren't enough. She needed more. Something undeniable, something that couldn't be rationalized away. The days that followed turned Isabella into a quiet investigator. She approached Julian's longtime driver, a discreet and loyal man who had been with the family for over a decade. After some careful conversation, he admitted Julian had made several unscheduled stops at an upscale loft complex in downtown Los Angeles. Each time, Julian had requested that he park a block away and wait without drawing attention. The driver hadn't asked questions, but his eyes, when he spoke, said everything. Then Isabella discovered a receipt tucked inside a coat pocket from a boutique hotel in San Francisco. Julian had always claimed to hate that hotel chain, citing a lack of privacy. Yet the receipt revealed a stay in their most romantic suite, complete with champagne service and an in-room spa. The check-in name wasn't even his full one, just JC, scribbled casually. As if even he knew it was something to hide. Every doubt hardened into certainty. The betrayal wasn't just physical, it was personal. It was a betrayal by the man who had vowed to share a life of honesty and devotion. The father of her children. The tech visionary who spoke so passionately at conferences about ethical leadership and moral clarity. He hadn't just broken her trust, he had fractured the image of the man she thought she knew. Isabella felt rage, shame, but above all, heartbreak deeper than she had ever known. It was the kind of heartbreak that makes your body ache, like grief without a funeral. What she didn't anticipate was how quickly things would spiral beyond her control. Determined to confront Julian face to face, she planned a private conversation for when he returned from a key summit, this one in London. She asked him to meet her at the Carrington estate before the annual family reunion, a grand weekend gathering of relatives from around the world. Julian's parents, siblings, aunts, uncles, and cousins, even distant ones, would be there. The weekend usually involved garden barbecues, benefit auctions, and tearful toasts about legacy and family unity. It was always sentimental, almost sacred, which made her timing both impossible and inevitable. But Julian's flight landed late. By the time he arrived at the estate, the reunion was already in full swing. The mansion buzzed with laughter, the clinking of wine glasses and cheerful conversations spilling through marble corridors. Julian entered, wearing a perfectly tailored navy suit, exuding the tired pride of a man returning from triumph. He moved through the crowd, greeting relatives with practiced ease, while Isabella stood quietly at the foot of the sweeping staircase, her heart pounding in her chest. She hadn't decided yet whether to confront him right away or wait until after the reunion dinner. But fate intervened. As Julian leaned in to hug his mother, his phone slipped from his suit pocket and hit the marble floor face down. A collective gasp rippled through the foyer. One of the teenage cousins quickly scooped it up and returned it to him, but not before the screen lit up with a message from Elisa. The same name Isabella had seen in earlier clues. "You did great, babe. Can't wait to see you next week." Julian's face flushed. He fumbled with the phone, laughing nervously. But the forced sound didn't convince anyone. A few relatives exchanged puzzled looks, others glanced away, trying to give the illusion of privacy. Only Isabella noticed the panic flickering beneath Julian's polished exterior. He quickly excused himself and disappeared into his study, undoubtedly to regroup. Isabella followed, her steps fueled by fury. Once inside, she closed the heavy mahogany door behind her. The room was lined with shelves of rare first editions, many gifted to Julian by fellow philanthropists. He stood with his back straight, tension radiating from his posture. "What do you want me to say?" he asked at last, his voice tight. Isabella met his gaze, her chest burning with hurt and disbelief. "I want you to tell me the truth. Who is she?" Julian hesitated, his eyes flicking toward the closed door, making sure they were alone. Then, as if some invisible wall gave way, the truth began to spill out. He didn't deny it. He explained. Her name was Elisa Madison, a financial strategist who had begun advising him on Nexora's global expansion. According to Julian, it started innocently. She was just a smart mind with helpful ideas. Then, slowly, boundaries blurred. He blamed it on stress, the pace, the attention, the adrenaline of high-stakes success. Before he even realized what had happened, he had stepped over a line he swore he never would. Isabella watched him tremble. But even in his remorse, she found no space for sympathy. His confession didn't mend anything. It tore the wound wider. Every word was another fracture in her trust. Still, she stood tall, holding on to composure, if only for a few more minutes. Outside the study, the annual family dinner was about to begin. Staff bustled through the halls, setting long banquet tables, arranging floral centerpieces, polishing crystal, ensuring every detail was perfect. Silver cutlery gleamed under the chandelier light, and vintage wines were checked for ideal temperature. Outside, children dashed across the lawns, playing under the watchful eyes of nannies, while uncles and cousins gathered on the terrace, engrossed in lively debates about business, sports, and philanthropic ventures. The estate hummed with the illusion of perfection, like a stage meticulously set before the curtain falls. On any other day, Isabella would have been the gracious hostess, smiling, steering conversation, and ensuring everything ran effortlessly. But tonight, she felt like a lead actress in a tragedy inching toward its final act. Her lines weren't scripted, but her resolve was. The truth had been building inside her like pressure behind a dam. She didn't stall. Instead, Isabella made the decision to confront Julian publicly. Not out of revenge, but because the truth needed air. Months of loneliness, suspicion, and quiet heartbreak had pushed her to this point. To continue pretending would crush her spirit beyond repair. She couldn't allow herself to be a silent co-star in a story built on lies. She reasoned that Julian's betrayal wasn't just personal. It was layered in deception, and he was carrying it while surrounded by family who adored him. They toasted to his brilliance. She knew the toast was to a version of him that no longer existed. As everyone settled for dinner, Isabella gave a subtle nod to the head butler to delay the first course. Then she tapped her crystal wine glass gently with a spoon. A delicate chime rang through the room, catching every ear. Conversations faded, heads turned. Across the room, Julian looked at her, wide-eyed, a flicker of panic flashing behind his calm facade. His smile faltered for just a second, but it was enough. Isabella's heart pounded, but on the outside she stood poised, regal, steel beneath silk. "Good evening, everyone," she began, her voice steady, the kind of calm that didn't need to shout to command attention. "I know you've all traveled from different corners of the world to be here tonight." A low hum of approval and curiosity moved through the dining hall. Julian's father, Edward Carrington, studied her closely. His mother, Vivienne, looked confused but concerned. The younger cousins quieted completely, sensing something larger unfolding. Even the servers froze, crystal pitchers suspended mid-pour. "This evening was meant to celebrate our family and the memories that connect us," Isabella continued. "But there's something I've been carrying, and I can't stay silent anymore." Her fingers curled slightly around the edge of her glass, steadying herself as if bracing for impact. She paused, drawing in a slow, measured breath. "Julian and I, well, our marriage isn't the picture you all imagine. In fact, I've decided to leave him." Silence fell like a stone. Gasps, soft whispers, the sharp clatter of dropped silverware echoed through the room like an off-key symphony. One of the younger cousins whispered, "Is she serious?" while an aunt covered her mouth in disbelief. Julian stiffened. His knuckles gripped the back of his chair, bone white. He opened his mouth to interrupt, but Isabella raised a hand, gracefully but firmly. A queen commanding the room with a single gesture. "I say this with deep regret, but also with honesty," she said, her voice faltering slightly before she caught herself. "Julian has been unfaithful." She steadied herself, every inch of her body fighting to hold composure, her pain shielded behind dignity. "I can't, in good conscience, stay silent and pretend nothing's wrong," Isabella said, her voice cracking slightly. "This is my choice, and I believe it's the right one." Each word felt like it carved a wound in the air, slicing through the illusion of harmony that had blanketed the room moments ago. A single tear escaped down her cheek. She wiped it gently, then looked out at the sea of stunned faces. Distant cousins, aunts and uncles, Julian's parents, and her own 2 children, watching from the far end of the table with confusion and fear in their young eyes. Lena clutched Eli's hand, her lower lip trembling. Eli's brows furrowed, his shoulders drawn tight, too young to fully grasp the depth of the moment, but old enough to feel the weight of it. Her heart fractured for them, but she pressed forward. I need you all to understand, she continued, voice thick with emotion. I've tried. For years, I've tried to hold our family together, to stand beside Julian through the highs and the lows, but there's only so much deception one heart can endure. Her voice quivered, but she didn't look away. She wanted them to see her strength, not just her sorrow. She paused, lowering her eyes briefly. I'm sorry if this ruins your evening. The apology landed like a thunderclap in the silence, as if she'd just shattered glass at the center of a carefully staged dinner. Julian's voice broke in, strained but assertive. Isabella, please, we can talk about this privately. There's no reason to do this in front of everyone. A quiet wave of tension rippled through the room. Some guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats, others held their breath. Even the flicker of candlelight seemed to dim. Isabella stood taller, meeting his gaze, her eyes glassy with heartbreak but her spine firm with conviction. She was no longer the wife trying to save a marriage. She was the woman standing in her truth. I begged you to talk privately, Julian, she said. For months, I reached out. I asked for openness. I waited for honesty. But you shut me out. So now, I'm done knocking on a door that won't open. Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. The silence that followed said more than any outburst ever could. A murmur of disbelief and sympathy passed through the gathering. Edward Carrington rubbed his temple, his expression clouded with confusion and regret. Vivian raised a trembling hand to her mouth. Julian's siblings exchanged stunned glances. Near the back, Naomi Lynn, Isabella's old friend, stood silently, her eyes brimming with tears. It was the moment that would split Isabella's life in two, the before and the after. The moment where illusion gave way to clarity, no matter how painful. In that single act, she had torn down the polished image they had worked so hard to maintain. Julian looked hollow, a man crushed by the weight of his own actions, his face pale, his confident posture slowly collapsing in on itself. The sharp lines of his tailored suit only emphasized the unraveling man within it. The grand dining hall, moments earlier filled with joyful chatter, now echoed like a chamber of ghosts. A flurry of overlapping voices stirred the air. Some guests rushed toward Isabella, reaching out to offer comfort. Others turned to Julian, demanding answers. Whispers became a wave, rippling across generations, fracturing the carefully preserved legacy of the Carrington name. The catering staff lingered in confusion, unsure whether to proceed or step back from the emotional wreckage unfolding in real time. Isabella, lightheaded from adrenaline, gave the head butler a subtle nod. He understood instantly. It was best to abandon the planned family dinner. Quietly, he began directing servers to distribute small meals in separate rooms for those who still wished to eat. Isabella turned, searching for her children, Eli and Lena. They had been playing in the adjacent hallway just moments before Isabella's announcement, but now she saw them standing at the entrance of the hall, their eyes wide with fear. Frozen, as if someone had hit pause on their childhood. "Mom?" Eli said cautiously, stepping forward. At 12, he was tall for his age, and his gaze flicked rapidly between Isabella and Julian. Lena, only 8, clung tightly to her brother's arm, her small face trembling, on the verge of tears. She buried half her face into Eli's side, as if trying to disappear. Isabella knelt down to their level, blocking out the noise of the adults around her, the chaos, the whispers, the shockwaves still rippling through the air. In that moment, nothing else mattered but the 2 small hearts she needed to protect. "My sweethearts," she said gently, her voice thick, "I'm so sorry you had to hear that. Your father and I, we love you so much, that will never change. Ever." She opened her arms. They both rushed in, leaning into her, their faces pressed against her shoulders, their confusion etched in every muscle. Eli's arms wrapped around her tighter than he had in years. Lena let out a soft sob, the kind only a child makes when the world no longer makes sense. Julian approached, his face pale and anguished. He extended a hand toward them, but Eli instinctively stiffened, and Lena pulled closer to Isabella's side. Julian froze at the sight, pain flashing across his expression. It was the kind of pain that came from recognition, a father realizing his children no longer saw him as a safe place. Then, without another word, he backed away, as if realizing that, in this moment, he was the source of their fear. A few feet away, Vivian Carrington stood silently, watching the heartbreaking scene unfold. Her eyes glistened with tears. She hovered there, clearly wanting to comfort them, but unsure of how to step in. Her hand hovered near her chest, clenching and unclenching, caught between maternal instinct and social paralysis. Eventually, she approached Isabella and placed a trembling hand on her shoulder. "My dear, is there anything I can do?" Isabella looked up, her eyes reflecting sorrow and a quiet steel. "Right now, I just need some space," she replied gently. "I'm sorry, I know this is hard on you too." Her voice was calm, but her gaze said everything. "Not now. Not here." Vivienne nodded, swallowing hard. It was a layered moment, painful and personal. She loved her son deeply, but she had also grown to love Isabella as the daughter she never had. And now she stood between them, watching a dream unravel from both ends. Elsewhere in the house, Edward Carrington had cornered Julian. His voice was low and tight. A former CEO with a commanding presence, Edward had never been one to withhold his opinion. From his stern, tight-lipped expression, it was clear the conversation was anything but friendly. Julian stood silent, shoulders squared, but his jaw clenched like a man preparing for impact. Later that evening, as relatives slowly retreated to their guest suites or nearby hotels, Isabella found herself alone in the estate's private library, one of her favorite sanctuaries. Dark cherry-wood shelves towered around her, filled with books from every era. A plush reading chair sat near an ornate fireplace, and a large window overlooked the sloping vineyards. She collapsed into the chair, drained. It was the first time she'd sat all day, but the weight wasn't just physical. It was years of quiet endurance finally crashing down. Memories surged around her like a flood. She thought of the early days with Julian, the way he used to speak with passion about uniting communities through technology, how they volunteered side by side in shelters during the early years of Nexora. She remembered the early days of Nexora, how they once spent a spontaneous night dancing under string lights in Golden Gate Park, swaying to the sound of a lone street violinist, just because it felt magical. They didn't need an occasion, just each other. Back then, love was the only backdrop they needed. Another memory surfaced, the night she lost a dear college friend to an unexpected illness. Isabella had been inconsolable, but Julian had shown up at her door with takeout from her favorite Thai place, a homemade CD of gentle piano music, and arms ready to hold her as she cried through the night. He didn't speak. He didn't try to fix it. He just stayed, and that had meant everything. They used to communicate so effortlessly, as if their souls were always in sync, speaking even in silence. When had that changed? She couldn't trace the exact moment, but she knew it was somewhere between product launches and media features. When Julian's rising star flew too close to the sun, he had stopped orbiting around their shared world and begun circling his own. Their philanthropic work had once been their glue. They co-founded the Carrington Hale Initiative, focused on supporting underserved youth in developing countries. Together, they traveled to remote villages in Africa and Southeast Asia, working directly with schools, clinics, and local leaders. Photographs from those trips, capturing their sun-drenched smiles and worn travel clothes, still hung along the library walls. Each photo now felt like a postcard from a version of them that no longer existed. But as Julian's empire grew, so did the demands and the distance. The first real sign had been his emotional absence. He stopped asking Isabella about her day, her goals, her dreams. Everything began to revolve around IPOs, partnerships, and quarterly forecasts. Nexora was all-consuming, and she became background noise in her own marriage. Her voice, once cherished, now bounced off boardroom walls he no longer invited her into. She rubbed her temples, a wave of tears rushing forward, ones she had fought all day to keep down. Tears that carried the weight of years spent shrinking herself to keep them together. She had tried so hard. For the children, for the memories, for the future, they promised each other. But once she saw undeniable proof of the affair, the photo, the texts, the lies, she realized she had been the only one still fighting. She was clinging to a life he had quietly stopped choosing. Down the hall, in one of the smaller guest suites, Julian paced in circles. His tie was undone, his suit jacket tossed carelessly on a chair. He looked like a man who had finally seen the scale of what he was about to lose. His reflection in the mirror looked unfamiliar, like a version of himself he no longer admired. Just hours ago, He was the billionaire tech mogul who could light up a room with charm. Now, the family he claimed to treasure was slipping through his fingers. Because of him. Not because of an accident, but because of 1,000 choices he made, one selfish moment at a time. He stared at the notification bar on his phone, unread messages from Elisa piling up. Guilt gripped his chest like a vice. Other messages pinged in too. Some sympathetic, others pressing for answers. He finally threw the phone onto the bed, unable to face the digital evidence of his betrayal. The screen dimmed, but the shame stayed bright. His father's voice echoed in his mind. "You're a fool, Julian. Your mother and I raised you to value loyalty, family. I didn't build a legacy for you to throw it away like this." Julian had tried to defend himself, but every excuse he clung to collapsed beneath the truth and the unbearable weight of guilt. He realized just how fragile his carefully crafted public image truly was. But more than that, he realized how deeply he had wounded Isabella, a woman he once saw as his perfect partner, the one who had stood by him more than anyone else ever had. A quiet knock at the door broke the stillness. He opened it to find his sister, Natalie Carrington, one of the few people in the family who never hesitated to speak her mind. She was 3 years older, with the same dark hair and commanding presence as Julian, though she had taken a quieter path in life, working as a clinical psychologist. She stepped inside, arms crossed. "What have you done?" she asked, her voice cutting, steeped in disappointment. It hit harder than any accusation. Julian sank down onto the edge of the bed, burying his face in his hands. "I don't know," he muttered. I messed up. Badly." Natalie stood firm in front of him. "This isn't some minor misstep. You betrayed Isabella in the worst way imaginable. You're risking not just her, but the respect of your kids. Are you really prepared to lose your entire family over this?" Julian looked up, desperation flickering in his eyes. "No, I don't want to lose her. I never meant for it to get this far. I was stupid. Elisa was a mistake, one I let go on too long. His words faded, his breath catching. Natalie's expression softened. She moved to sit beside him, placing a gentle hand on his back. "It's time you decide what actually matters," she said. "You're brilliant at structuring billion-dollar deals, building global partnerships, but somewhere along the way, you forgot how to nurture the partnership that should have mattered most. Your marriage." Tears welled in Julian's eyes. Natalie had never seen him like this, and witnessing her brother, once so composed, so invincible, break down this way, shattered something inside her too. "What can I do?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper, as if grasping for a lifeline. Natalie let out a quiet sigh. "Talk to her, and I mean really talk to her. Apologize. Be honest. But don't expect forgiveness just because you feel sorry. You'll need to show her through actions, not words, that you're willing to change. And if she still wants a divorce, you have to respect that." He nodded slowly, swallowing the truth like a bitter pill. It was possible that he had already lost too much to fix what he broke, but he knew one thing. He had to try. The following morning, tension still clung to the Carrington estate like fog. About half of the extended family chose to leave early, not wanting to get caught in the fallout. Others stayed, hoping to quietly support either Isabella or Julian in whatever way they could. Eli and Lena had been taken to a nearby cousin's home, a quiet effort to shield them from the unraveling chaos inside the Carrington estate. The house, once alive with voices and laughter, now sat in eerie stillness. Even the walls seemed to absorb the silence, as if ashamed of the truths they had overheard. In a move that surprised no one, Elisa began calling Julian repeatedly, her messages demanding clarity. He ignored them all. He didn't know what to say. He wasn't even sure if he wanted to speak to her again. Every ring felt like an echo from a version of himself he no longer wanted to answer to. But deep down, he already knew the truth. Elisa was not the person he wanted to build a life with. She had been a reckless detour, selfish, thrilling, and ultimately destructive. Now that choice threatened to tear apart everything he truly valued. He had gambled with everything sacred and lost. Around midday, Julian finally gathered the nerve to approach Isabella's room. She had moved into a separate guest suite the night before, a clear signal of the distance she now intended to maintain. He knocked, gently. Her voice came from inside, quiet, guarded. "Come in." His heart pounded as he stepped into the room. Isabella stood by the tall window, dressed simply in a white blouse and soft linen pants. Her eyes were rimmed with exhaustion, her skin pale from lack of sleep. And yet, even in her fragility, she radiated a calm dignity that stopped Julian in his tracks. She wasn't broken, she was transformed, hurt but whole. She looked like the woman he had fallen in love with, all those years ago. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice trembling. The weight of those words filled the room like fog. It was the first honest thing he'd said to her in weeks, and the most useless. "I know I don't deserve to ask you for anything," he continued, "but I need you to know. I'm sorry. For the lies, for the betrayal, for the pain I've caused." Isabella didn't turn. Her gaze remained fixed on the vineyards rolling out beyond the estate. The same view they used to dream from. Now just acres of distance between who they were and who they'd become. "You should have thought about that before," she said, voice low, hollow. "I'm past apologies, Julian. Right now, I just want to figure out how we move forward for the kids' sake." Julian's breath caught in his throat. He had prepared for anger, for grief, but not this quiet clarity. "I understand, and I deserve that," he said. "But before we go any further, you should know. My relationship with Elisa, it's over." Isabella finally turned to face him, her eyes glossy with unshed tears. She didn't flinch, she didn't soften, she simply stared. The weight of everything he'd shattered reflected back at him. "Over because you got caught?" she asked quietly. "Or over because you realized it was wrong?" The question sliced through him like a blade. Julian closed his eyes, his guilt rising in his chest like a wave. "I was selfish and stupid," he admitted. "I got swept up in it. The attention, the adrenaline. Maybe it was a midlife crisis or maybe just weakness. But I see now it was meaningless. Compared to you, compared to our family." His voice cracked, and for the first time in years he didn't try to fix it. Isabella let out a shaking breath. "I used to believe you were the one person who would never do this," she whispered. "Maybe I was naive, or maybe just blind." She paused, studying his face, searching for the man he used to be and wondering if he'd been real at all. "I'm filing for divorce." "I need you to understand that," Julian whispered, just as tears finally spilled down his cheeks. They weren't theatrical. They were quiet, desperate, the kind that came too late. He fell silent, shoulders collapsing as if the weight of the entire world had suddenly landed on them. "I understand," he said after a beat. "If that's truly what you want, I won't fight you. But I need you to know, I'll do anything for a second chance." His voice cracked, and for once, he didn't try to smooth it over. The man who once commanded boardrooms now stood pleading with nothing but shattered sincerity. Isabella looked away, her own tears sliding quietly down her face. She didn't sob, she didn't speak, but her silence screamed of everything she'd lost. "I don't know if I can ever trust you again," she said, her voice breaking. "All these years, I believed in your integrity, in your values, your sense of right and wrong, and to find out you carried on a lie like this for months..." She shook her head, as if trying to physically shake off the image of the man she thought she knew. "It's just too much." Julian nodded, struggling to swallow the ache rising in his throat. "I'll respect your decision," he said. "Whatever you choose, I'll cooperate. But Isabella, if there's even the smallest chance that someday you might forgive me, I promise you, I'll work every day to prove I deserve it." Each word left his mouth like a confession, stripped of charm, stripped of ego. Just raw, unfiltered regret. For the briefest second, Isabella's expression softened, a flicker of the love that still lingered underneath the pain, but her voice remained steady. "You need to leave." She turned back toward the window, the same window she had once stood beside waiting for him to come home, now the place she stood to send him away. "I need time alone, to think. The children will be back later, and I have to figure out how to explain all of this to them." Julian nodded again, this time without a word. He knew that any attempt to plead further would only widen the fracture. And even though every fiber of him wanted to hold her, to beg her not to file for divorce, he understood the cruel irony. The man who had spent his life solving problems, overcoming impossible odds, closing billion-dollar deals, now stood completely powerless. Powerless to undo what he had broken, and powerless in the face of the one thing he couldn't negotiate back: trust. Julian hadn't even begun to piece together what his next move would be when an unexpected visitor arrived at the Carrington estate gates. Elisa Madison. She wore a sharp black blazer and tailored skirt, every bit the polished financial consultant. Despite the evident tension surrounding the estate, she looked composed, almost unfazed, as if unaware or unwilling to accept the wreckage in her wake. The security team recognized her from previous visits with Julian, and after exchanging uncertain glances, allowed her through, though not without hesitation. She approached the grand entrance with purpose, ignoring the wary stares from household staff. The rumors had already circulated among them. They knew who she was and why she had come. Elisa, however, looked undeterred. Her chin lifted defiantly as she stepped into the marble foyer. A storm in heels, uninvited and unbothered. She spotted Julian descending the grand staircase, a storm of emotions sweeping across his face. Shock, anger, guilt. The man who once exuded control now looked like someone bracing for impact. He walked toward her, his voice low and guarded. "What are you doing here?" "I need to talk to you," Elisa replied, her tone clipped and cold. "You haven't answered a single one of my calls. I heard what happened last night." Her voice was steady, but her eyes burned, not with sadness, but entitlement. She let out a sharp breath. "The whole family knows now, don't they?" Julian's eyes flared. "Drama? You think this is just drama?" He snapped. "My entire family is unraveling because of us." His voice trembled with restrained fury. At her, at himself, at the mess he could no longer contain. Elisa crossed her arms. "You mean because of your wife's overreaction? She's the one who made a scene in front of everyone." There was no remorse in her tone, only irritation that the secret had lost its shelter. Julian's jaw clenched. A surge of protectiveness for Isabella overtook him. A new line had been drawn, and Elisa had just stepped over it. "Don't you dare blame her. She has every right to be angry. We lied to her, both of us." Elisa scoffed. "You're making me sound like the villain. You told me yourself Isabella didn't get you anymore, that the marriage was already dead." Guilt pierced Julian's chest. Each word landed like a slap of his own past weakness replayed aloud. Yes, he'd said those things, in weak moments, looking for comfort or escape. But now, those words felt like weapons turned against him. "Whatever I said," he responded, "the truth is I made a commitment to her, and I broke it. That's on me." He inhaled sharply. "This is over. I can't keep doing this." Elisa's expression twisted, a blend of disbelief and fury. The calm mask she wore shattered, revealing something more volatile beneath. "So that's it," she snapped. "You destroy your marriage, and now you're walking away from me too?" Julian sighed, a wave of exhaustion crashing over him. His body slumped slightly, as if crushed by the realization that there was no graceful way out. "I'm sorry," he said. "I never should have let this happen." His voice was hollow, stripped of charm, stripped of excuses. Elisa's eyes sparked. "You don't just get to ghost me, Julian. I've invested in this, emotionally, professionally. Do you even understand what that means?" Julian pinched the bridge of his nose, a dull ache already building behind his eyes. "I'll make sure your professional standing isn't affected," he said quietly. "If you need references, or if there's a role at Nexora that—" She cut him off, her voice heavy with sarcasm. "Oh, how generous. Thanks for the job offer, Julian, but I didn't come here for a promotion." Her words dripped with venom, but behind them a flicker of hurt shone through, masked by rage. She stepped closer, her voice tightening. "You and I had something real, and now you're just tossing me aside because it's inconvenient?" Her voice cracked slightly, just enough to reveal that this wasn't only about power, it was about rejection. Julian took a slow, deep breath. "I'm not tossing you aside," he said, voice firm. "I'm doing the only thing—" "I can't keep doing this," Julian said quietly. "I can't keep feeding a relationship that was built on lies." His voice was steady, but behind his words was a man unraveling, not from anger, but from clarity. The tension in the air was suffocating. Elisa stared at him, her fury tangled with hurt. For a brief second she looked as though she might cry. Her bottom lip quivered, but she bit it quickly, willing herself not to show weakness. But then her face hardened. "Fine," she snapped. "If that's how you want to play it. Just don't expect me to stay quiet if Isabella goes public with all of this." Her eyes narrowed. There was venom there now, and something even more dangerous, resentment. "Don't forget, Julian, I know a lot about your business dealings." The threat was unmistakable. and it terrified Julian, not because he had anything illicit to hide. He'd always prided himself on being aggressive, but ethical. But ethics didn't matter in headlines. Perception did. What worried him was the damage a public scandal could do, not to him, but to Isabella, and more importantly, their children. He could weather the storm, but could Eli and Lena? Could Isabella's already bruised world take another hit? Before he could respond, a voice cut through the charged air. Isabella had entered the foyer. She must have heard the raised voices from the hallway. Her eyes darted between Julian and Elisa, a flash of shock on her face at the sight of them standing there together. Then she straightened, composed, commanding, like a queen walking into a battlefield she hadn't asked for, but would win regardless. "You must be Elisa," Isabella said coolly. Her tone was icy, but impeccably controlled. "I suggest you leave. This is neither the time nor the place." Elisa stared at her. For a moment, no one moved. The silence between them crackled like a live wire. Two women standing on opposite sides of a shattered world, and only one of them holding the power now. Then, perhaps recognizing the immovable strength in Isabella's eyes, Elisa exhaled sharply. Without another word, she turned on her heel and strode out of the house. Her heels echoed defiantly, but her departure reeked of defeat. Julian thought about following her to prevent the situation from escalating. But one look at Isabella's face, drawn, pale, brimming with silent grief, kept him rooted in place. She didn't need him to follow anyone. She needed him to finally stop running. They stood in silence until the sound of Elisa's heels on the marble floor faded completely. Isabella closed her eyes as if gathering the last of her strength. "Do me a favor," she said quietly, meeting Julian's gaze. "Pack your things and leave. I need this house to myself for a while. I need to think without you here." Julian opened his mouth to object, maybe offer to stay in the East Wing. But the pain in her eyes silenced him. It was the look of someone hanging on by threads, and he was the scissors. "All right," he said softly. "I'll go, but if you need anything—" She shook her head before he could finish. Without another word, she turned and disappeared down the corridor. Julian stood there, watching her vanish into the shadows of the Carrington estate, realizing this might be the last time he saw her under the same roof. The home they built had become her refuge, and his exile. In the weeks that followed, life spiraled into a blur of legal meetings, custody negotiations, and relentless public scrutiny. The media had caught wind of the affair and Isabella's dramatic announcement. Though no official details were released, whispers spread fast. Isabella refused to engage with any of it. She let silence speak for her, louder than any headline ever could. Still, photographers camped outside high-rise law firms, hoping to catch a glimpse of either party. Society columnists ran wild with speculation, some claiming Isabella was preparing for a massive settlement, others painting Julian as just another billionaire cliché. Rumors swirled that Isabella was demanding a massive settlement, while others painted Julian as yet another tech mogul cliché, a billionaire blinded by ego and lust. Headlines screamed betrayal. Comment sections debated morality. And beneath it all, real lives were unraveling in silence. Julian relocated temporarily to a sleek penthouse in Manhattan, throwing himself into work in an attempt to drown out the noise and the guilt. At the same time, he tried every possible avenue to reach Isabella. The boardrooms offered distraction, not solace. Emails piled up, but her silence echoed louder than any investor pitch. He wrote her letters, long, handwritten apologies filled with remorse. He poured out his regrets, his sorrow, his promises to change. Quietly, he arranged for a significant donation to be made to the Carrington Hale Initiative, hoping to show he still cared about their shared mission of global philanthropy. But each gesture was met with silence. Not cruel, not cold, just final. The kind of silence that told him she wasn't ready, or maybe never would be. Isabella, meanwhile, was navigating her own emotional storm. She had retained a respected divorce attorney, someone known for protecting the interests of high-profile women and ensuring the future of their children remained secure. Every day felt like a tightrope walk across heartbreak and duty. She was grieving a man who wasn't dead, mourning a future that hadn't happened. Some mornings, she was resolute. She knew she couldn't go back. Other times, memories overwhelmed her. Of the man she once adored. The father of her children. the person she had envisioned growing old beside. Was there space for forgiveness? Could she ever trust him again? Her parents offered encouragement, reminding her of her strength, her dignity. They reminded her she had built a life before Julian, and could build one after. Naomi Lynn, her closest friend, had become a near-constant presence, offering tissues, hugs, and brutally honest truths. She was the voice of clarity when Isabella's mind felt like a storm of what-ifs. One quiet afternoon, over mugs of peppermint tea in Isabella's sunlit lounge, Naomi asked a question that pierced her heart. "When you picture your future," Naomi said softly, "do you feel a flicker of hope that maybe, just maybe, Julian could still be part of it? Or does that thought just hurt too much?" Isabella stared into the swirling tea, as if the answer might rise from the steam. "I don't know," she admitted. "I'm angry, I'm hurt, but there's a part of me that wonders, am I losing not just a marriage, but a partner? A man who, for all his mistakes, once loved me in a way no one else ever has?" Naomi nodded, understanding. "That's what healing is. You don't have to decide everything today. Grieve, recover. If Julian's truly remorseful, he'll give you the space to do that." Her voice was soft but unwavering, a friend who would hold her hand, no matter what path she chose. At the same time, Julian was wrestling with his own guilt. One night, he found himself walking through Central Park, retracing the steps of a moment years ago when he and Isabella had danced under the stars to the tune of a street violinist. The memory gutted him. He sat on a nearby bench and broke down, sobbing quietly. The city blurred around him, honking cabs, blinking lights, but all he could hear was the sound of her laughter, now out of reach. That night had felt like a dream, like two souls finding each other in the chaos of the world. Now, it felt like it belonged to someone else's life. For the first time, Julian considered therapy, recognizing that his relentless pursuit of admiration, success, and validation had come at the cost of the people he loved most. He had built a kingdom, but lost his crown. If he had any hope of repairing what was broken, he had to begin with himself. A few days later, Julian arranged a private meeting with Isabella's attorney. He made it clear that he wanted everything, property, assets, custody, to be handled respectfully and with care. He insisted on equal joint custody of the children. If Isabella was open to it, Julian promised he would do nothing to make the process combative or painful. He even began seriously considering stepping back from his role as CEO of Nexora to put his family first. For the first time, legacy meant something different to him. Not headlines, not valuations, but the way his children would remember him. To the tech world, it would have been a headline-grabbing move, Julian Carrington stepping away from the empire he built. But to him, it felt like a necessary sacrifice. It was no longer about control. It was about redemption. A way to prove he was serious about change. Word of his decisions eventually reached Isabella, most of it through her lawyer. And while she remained guarded, she couldn't deny that Julian's actions hinted at genuine remorse. Gone were the performative gestures. In their place were quiet signals that he might finally be listening. Maybe, just maybe, he was finally seeing beyond the ego, the accolades, the status. She concluded that it would be beneficial for the children to spend time with their father. She didn't want her own pain to sever their connection to him. She could no longer protect their innocence, but she could preserve their bond. So she agreed to a short afternoon meeting at a public park, a neutral space where Eli and Lena could play. The reunion was awkward at first. Julian arrived early, dressed down in jeans and a soft blue sweater, a notable shift from his usual designer suits. He carried a bouquet of sunflowers, Isabella's favorite, not roses, not orchids. Sunflowers, humble, bright, resilient, just like her. When the children arrived, he greeted them with a nervous smile. Eli hung back, stiff and uncertain as Julian bent to hug him, but Lena darted into his arms without hesitation, burying her face in his shoulder as if the past few weeks had momentarily disappeared. Julian held her like a man clutching something fragile and sacred, knowing he might not get another chance. Isabella watched from a short distance, her chest tightening. The sight was both balm and blade. Julian met her eyes across the park. Slowly, he walked toward her and held out the sunflowers with quiet sincerity. "Thank you," he said gently, "for letting me see them. They're everything to me, and so are you, Isabella." She accepted the bouquet, her lips tightening as she fought emotion. Her fingers trembled around the stems, but she didn't let go. "Not yet. I'm doing this for them," she replied, her voice unsteady. "They miss you." Julian nodded. "I miss them, and I miss you, more than I can say. I know words aren't enough, but I'm working every day to become the man you once believed in." His tone wasn't polished, it was raw. And that, more than anything, made her pause. They spoke for a little while longer, exchanging cautious words while the children played on the swings nearby. It was the beginning, fragile, tentative, of something that might one day resemble healing. Not a reunion, not a reconciliation, but a possibility. That night, Isabella lay awake, replaying everything in her mind. Sometimes divorce is clean, a definitive break from a bond that can no longer be salvaged. Other times, it's more complicated. It becomes a mirror, a reckoning, a push toward personal transformation, and a test of whether love can survive the ruin it didn't deserve. Could Julian truly change? Could he rebuild what he shattered? Or was it simply too late? In the months that followed, Julian committed to therapy. He stepped back from the day-to-day operations at Nexora and devoted himself to showing Isabella, not through grand gestures, but through quiet, consistent action, that he was serious about putting family first. He no longer fought for her forgiveness. He worked for it, one small, invisible step at a time. Meanwhile, Isabella focused on healing. She attended counseling. She poured herself into her philanthropic work. She continued building strength, rediscovering clarity. She didn't wait for closure. She created it for herself. The divorce proceedings moved forward, slowly, carefully. Her attorney ensured every aspect of child support and asset division had been negotiated to ensure fairness. But something shifted the day Isabella agreed, cautiously, to attend a family therapy session with Julian. Against all odds, old wounds began to heal. Not quickly, not completely, but steadily. In those sessions, she started to see Julian not as the polished CEO or the man who had betrayed her, but as someone flawed, remorseful, and sincerely trying to repair what he had broken. The day Isabella's attorney brought the final divorce documents for her signature, she sat in silence for several minutes, the papers in front of her. She hesitated. Memories surfaced. How Julian had once been her best friend, not just her husband. The laughter, the late-night conversations, the unspoken support during the early chaos of building Nexora together. Could that foundation be rebuilt? Not as it was. Too much had changed. But maybe something new could rise from the ruins. That evening, Isabella went to Julian's penthouse with the signed papers in hand. He opened the door, visibly nervous. "I want you to know," he said gently, "that if you sign them, I won't fight it. I take responsibility. I accept the consequences." She nodded and stepped inside. The apartment was sleek, minimal, sterile, the opposite of the warm family home they once shared. "I didn't come here to argue," Isabella said softly. "I just want to talk." They sat across from each other, the documents resting silently on the coffee table between them. And they talked. For hours. They spoke about trust, what it meant, how easily it could be broken, and what it would take to rebuild it. They discussed boundaries, commitments, and the necessity of time, real time, to prove whether change was lasting. Julian didn't beg for reconciliation. He didn't make promises he couldn't guarantee. Instead, he offered to keep living separately, to continue therapy together, and to rebuild slowly, for the sake of the children and for themselves. In the end, Isabella reached for the pen. But she didn't sign. She looked at Julian, tears forming in her eyes. Not from pain, but from something else. Something like hope. "I'm not ready to forgive you," she said quietly. "Not fully. But I'm willing to give us a chance. A real one. If this doesn't work, I'll sign them. But I need to know we tried." A single tear slipped down Julian's cheek. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice cracking. "I promise. I'll spend the rest of my life working to deserve that chance." And so they began a new chapter. Tentative, uncertain, but not without hope. The media eventually moved on, chasing newer scandals. The extended family stopped whispering once they saw that Julian was genuinely changing. No, life didn't snap back into some perfect, polished picture. It was never a fairy tale. It was a complex tapestry woven from love, betrayal, regret, and the fragile threads of renewal. Yet through perseverance, truth, and the unwavering commitment to their children, Julian and Isabella found themselves walking a path they never imagined possible. One where even fractured trust could be rebuilt. slowly, painfully, one honest day at a time. Would their story end in full reconciliation, or with the clarity that they were better apart? Only time would tell. But for now, hope was enough. Thank you for joining me on this emotional journey of love, betrayal, and potential redemption. The wife announced her divorce in front of the whole family, and the cheating billionaire husband panicked. This story reminds us that even the wealthiest lives and the most glamorous images can crumble with a single act of betrayal. And yet, if the love beneath it all is real, there might still be a path to healing. Whether this couple finds their way back to one another, or finds strength in letting go, what matters most is the courage to face the truth, take full responsibility, and commit to real, lasting change. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to this channel for more dramatic, heartfelt stories just like this one. Your support helps us continue bringing you gripping content that dives deep into the human experience, where love, loss, and transformation meet. Until next time, thank you for watching.